Coach Terence Biggs and Dr. Sharon Biggs. And they are both coaches and doctors and authors in their own rights. I've had the honor and pleasure of working with both of them on different ventures. I work with Dr. Biggs personally within the school district that I'm in. She actually served as a principal coach for me, and I had the opportunity to work with Coach Terence Biggs as he is a life leader coach, as we did some Maxwell work, some John Maxwell work on leadership. So I will read the bios that I have for them, and then I'll share a public service announcement with you, and we'll get on into our interviews. So first, well, you know what? I'm going to do ladies first. I'm going to be gentlemanly because I was going to read Terrence's first, but I'm going to do the chivalrous thing, the gentleman thing, and let ladies go first. So Dr. Sharon M. Biggs is Vice President of Organizational and Educational Leadership at Marketplace Dynamics, LLC. Dr. Biggs serves as an executive educational leadership coach who for almost 30 years filled the roles of Department of Education State Turnaround Coach, Executive Director, and Leadership Coach, Assistant to the Superintendent, Principal, Assistant Principal, and Teacher Leader. She credits much of her success to having been birthed in the trenches as a classroom teacher for 16 years in New York City and New Jersey. Dr. Biggs is a graduate of the Harvard Principals Institute and recipient of a Dodge Principals Fellowship Grant. She's become a sought-after leadership coach, trainer, consultant, and speaker, and is the author of several books available online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, including Bigisms, sayings and quotes to help make sense of things when life happens, and 2 books of poetry, one for children and one for adults. And the one I'm holding in my hand is The Silo Effect, Invisible Barriers That Can Destroy Organizational Teams. And the other half of the Biggs duo, I have Coach Terence H. Biggs II. He's an author, team builder, certified leadership trainer, speaker, mentor, consultant, blogger, and digital marketer, specializing in developing the leader within the individuals that make up an organization through the use of performance management, change management, and talent development. He's an author and a graduate of the Dale Carnegie Leadership Institute and the John Maxwell licensed and certified speaker, trainer, and executive coach. His passion is to work closely with individuals, businesses, and organizations to guide them in evaluating their leadership effectiveness, identifying their self-limiting beliefs, leadership blind spots, and progress roadblocks, and developing a leadership growth strategy that raises their leadership lids. Wow, that sounds really familiar. I remember the leadership lid. My mission is, or his mission is to guide them to identify and implement strategies that will lead to results that so far have remained elusive. His clients range from Wall Street to down the street. Let me put my 30 plus years of Wall Street and entrepreneurial experience to work for you. Welcome to the Reading Circle microphones, Coach Terence Biggs and Dr. Sharon Biggs. Good morning, Biggses.
Good morning. Morning, sir.
All right. It is a thrill to have the two of you on here because, as I said in my preamble or in the introduction, I've had the opportunity of working personally with both of you. And so not only personally, but professionally. So to have you on the show now is a wonderful thing that we can widen the audience and let some other folks besides me know about you and other folks that you network with, those in my listening audience and those who will catch it on YouTube or however we choose to share it after here, who didn't rise early with us. But in any event, we'll get it out there. So one of my first questions that I generally ask, because I don't use a pat set of questions, and it really, I'm going to kind of like have you walk me through where did everything begin? Because I'm looking how the paths crossed, and it's education related, and it's leadership related, and it's helping others be better. In other words, it's not just about you. It's not just about you. And when I say you and you, I mean Terence and Sharon. It's not just about you two. It's about making life better for others. Talk to me a little bit about how did all that come about?
Well, Dr. Biggs and I were watching the Black Hawk Down, which was aired on 60 Minutes, and it covered, the Somalia situation in October 1993, where one of our Black Hawks went down. And at the conclusion of watching that program, we just broke out into this dialogue about leadership and the type of leadership that it would take to lead others on a battlefield, and how that type of leadership is totally different. That's that transformational leadership that kicks in spite of what's going on. You still have to lead to get from point A to point B, and what are the dynamics of that? How is that different from what you would call everyday leadership? And from that discussion, we started looking at individuals that we knew that if the house was on fire and everybody was running out of the house, these individuals had the DNA that they were running towards the house. And then that kind of got us on the track of Gutsy DNA, because it takes guts to do what these leaders do when most people would rather go the other way. From there, we just kept dialoguing, and then we said we really needed to capture this and publish a book on it, which led to the publishing of the DNA of Gutsy Leaders. And the subtitle is really something that's dear to us, which is, I'm made for this moment. And that's what a gutsy leader says when a situation presents itself to him or her. He doesn't say, we need somebody to take this situation and take charge of it. They say, I'm that somebody. I'm made for this, and I'm going to do this.
And then in addition to that, Mark, we also wanted to fill a leadership book niche that we just didn't think seemed to be covered at that point. There were a lot of technical leadership books, but we wanted to write something that was more tangible for the audiences, and something that would focus on modern-day leaders, people who are still alive, who are still breathing, just like you and I, and they have normal lives just like you and I. And so we wanted to show people also who are in different industries and different roles, but they have a common thread of that gutsy leadership that my husband talked about. And then we also wanted to write a book that would encourage people who didn't necessarily view themselves as leaders to see that they actually have something within them, in their DNA, that they maybe haven't tapped into, but they've been wired for that moment, whatever that moment is.
I'm glad you touched on that, because whenever you said the impetus of this was watching the whole thing about Black Hawk Down, in terms of the leadership that would have to be displayed there, that is the height or the epitome of the word gutsy. I mean, the situation in and of itself, you're in the military, you're on a battlefield. I mean, you really have to be able to lead almost by instinct or by practice, or you really cannot be trying to wing it or flight. It has to be from your training and from your instinct. And Dr. Biggs, you just said something that drove me to this question, which is, even though the impetus was the battlefield, there are folks who lead in far less disparate situations than a battlefield that have to have that same DNA or the same gutsiness, if you will. So let's talk about that. Like, we have leaders in different fields, and like you said, there are some people, you could have the postman that's a leader. You could have, a church leader. There's so many things where we need leaders in, and folks, like you said, will probably not see what they do as, I didn't do anything gutsy. As you were going through and you were talking to people, kind of like, what were the responses you were getting from folks who weren't leading like the battlefield?
Sure. It was interesting because, first of all, the people that we interviewed for the book, and there were about 9 of them, they didn't see themselves as gutsy leaders, and they were all so amazed that we approached them to be a part of the book. And they said, why me? I don't do anything different than, what needs to be done. And we said, well, no, you are viewed as someone who's gutsy because you're doing things that the average person isn't tapping into. So you make the point about, people in different walks of life, and we tell stay-at-home moms, you are a leader. We tell those who are students, millennials, you're leaders in your own right. You just got to tap into those attributes. And, we want to talk a little bit more about what those attributes are. I'll give my husband an opportunity to do that.
And just to emphasize, Mark, it was such a point of revelation to us as we we went around and actually interviewed the individuals that we focused on in the book. And the takeaway for me and Dr. Biggs was just the humility that we found in these super capable individuals. I mean, some of them have accomplished great feats. Their leadership span for decades, and the accomplishment is just incredible. And you're sitting there and you're interviewing them, and what's coming out of their mouth is, "What's the big deal?" and it really, that's why I say the subtitle really meant so much to us, because they were saying, "This is what I was made for. Why are you so excited about this? That's what I was do."
Right.
No, that's absolutely. And the thing is, I tell people all the time, if something looks easy, and I know this is not grammatically correct, if something looks easy, it ain't. And what I mean by that is, folks have put in the work behind the scenes that other folks can't see. And because they're putting in that work behind the scenes and they're getting the results that they're getting, they do kind of look at those who question it as if to say, this is kind of like, this is how I do. This is what I do. Back to your, I'm made for this moment. So I don't see why folks are surprised. And the only reason they say it is because they're so immersed in it and they know it so well. They almost feel like, doesn't everybody do this? And to hear that everybody doesn't, that's probably kind of where the disconnect comes in.
Right.
Well, I would like to add, one of the topics that we cover in the book is having, I guess the parallel is like a bank account. You make deposits.
Right.
And so that you can make withdrawals. What gutsy leaders realize is that they make a deposit from a favorable leadership experience. They also make a deposit from an unfavorable leadership experience.
Absolutely.
So when a situation presents itself, they go back to that bank, they can withdraw and keep moving, while most folk got to start reading to catch up.
Right.
They're ahead of the pack. They've already seen this model before.
And, having that bank account, so to speak, makes this leader look like the perfect fit for whatever he's doing. And that's why I think, as you said, Mark, it makes it look easy to the outsider, but it really is not easy.
Right.
There's a lot of planning and strategizing and preparation that has to go into it. There's a lot of private reflection that gutsy leaders spend time doing because, of course, gutsy leaders never publicly flinch, right?
Right.
They're always, their game face is always on out in public, but in private, that's when they're reflecting.
Right.
Coaches and their mentors and bouncing ideas off and saying, what do you think I should do here? I handled this situation this way. Would you have handled it differently? And they're getting advice from their own coaches and mentors.
No, you're absolutely right, because this is what I share with folks whenever they talk about how Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and all those folks, how it was just so easy for them to hit the buzzer beaters. I said, yeah, they were able to do that because what you didn't see was after a grueling game, Michael Jordan would stay and do laps around the arena again. What you didn't see was Larry Bird counting every nail on the Boston Garden floor and every wood board that he knew when that ball hit that spot what the ball was going to do. That's the things you don't see. All you see is the buzzer beater jump shot that they made look so easy. It's the same thing with leaders. And as you both just said, in terms of the planning and, calling on past experiences and the reflection and the coaching. And the other thing people don't understand in terms of even the greatest of whatever field you're in has someone that's working with them as a coach. Tiger Woods, as great as he was as a coach, he still had coaches. I don't care in what field that you're in. And I had this conversation with a child the other day because it was a student who, what Dr. Biggs, as you know, we call him a resource student who, they have a particular teacher that can work with them. And the child said, I'm ashamed to be called a resource student. And I broke down this whole thing that we're talking about, even talked about you, how even I have a coach. So this whole notion of even if somebody as the leader also has somebody to rely on or to call on or to fall back on. But most people don't see leaders as having to have a coach.
Yeah, that's true. And, the interesting thing is we say that the most effective leaders are the ones who remain coachable for their entire lives. And when we get to a point, or if we get to that point where we say, you know what, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. I already know. I've going downhill from there.
Right.
But when we continue to say, I have more questions than I have answers, that's when you know that you're coachable and you're going to continue to move upward on that trajectory.
So then if I'm hearing, if I were to, kind of put into an equation, or at least put into this DNA mix, remaining coachable would probably be a part of the DNA of Gutsy leaders.
Absolutely. We emphasize in the book the concept of lifelong learners. And I think that, I was listening to your show before we came on, and you talk about your private time where you're reading and you're getting immersed in so much. And what a lot of folk don't realize is when you start to lead your team, a lot of this private preparation is what they view as, oh my God, he's just, there's no effort. Well, there's no effort because you've committed to a life of constantly consuming more information. I'll share something that blows most people's mind. Coaches have coaches.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
They look at you like, oh, wait a minute, I don't follow. But you're committed to constantly being a better you.
Right.
And as believers, as Christians ourselves, we know that God is always propelling us to move forward.
Correct.
When you find yourself stagnant and you're relying on the stories and the accomplishments of yesteryears, you have lost relevance.
No, that's absolutely right. And it's funny that, when we laughed just now, we said coaches. For some reason, people see coaching as a negative. And I kind of sort of get it to a degree, but it's back to what Dr. Big said. When you get to that point when you don't think you need anybody, that's exactly when you are going to go down. Because I'm reading a book now that I just started, and I just recommended it to my team yesterday. And it's called Never Fly Solo. Lead with courage, build trusting partnerships, and reach new heights in business. And it's by Lieutenant Colonel Rob Waldo Waldman. Now, for me, because I love aviation, I immediately connected with it, because this is a lieutenant colonel that flew combat missions over Iraq, so forth and so on. He's put his thoughts in a book, and I'm only on chapter 2, but some of the same stuff that we're talking about, because that's why he's saying never fly solo. And it's exactly what you're just talking about. Even coaches have coaches. No one, as much as we may say in this country, pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps. Really, no, it's not about it. It takes everyone to do it. I was sharing earlier, I don't know when you tuned in, but from the 6 o'clock hour till the time you all joined, I was doing personal commentary, and I was saying how this season I played on a fall softball team within our district league, and we had a little ragtag Bad News Bears team, and we actually wound up being the champions. But the beauty of it, what came to me last night in terms of like Dr. Biggs talking about reflecting, when I reflected on the whole experience, even though none of us were like top of the line, but the fact is everybody played their part. And regardless of where we were asked to play, because normally I played right field, but yesterday somebody was out. They said, "Would you go catch?" Okay, great. I'll be the catcher. And we had those scenarios throughout the whole season, but we made it work. And the only reason it worked was because of the team. And the other reason it worked was because of our leader, our coach, if you will, had the wherewithal to change lineups, to change people around, to put people where they need to, and it all worked. But that's the way things work. And see, going back to the DNA of the Gutsy leader. Okay, so when we say DNA, all right, let me back up based on your title. So when we say DNA, are we saying there are some things that are inherent, or are these things that they get and it gets into their DNA?
I would say it's the latter.
That's what I thought.
We talked about. I think that one of the best teachers is just experience. Being immersed
Yes.
in situations equips you for the next situation.
And you just kind of know what to do. You tap in, because one of the things about Gutsy leaders too is that they're big on data collection.
Right.
And so, they tap into what worked in a similar situation in the past, and then how might I move forward handling this situation that I'm now dealing with. And then they project ahead to possible situations in the future, but they're always basing it on what did the data say before, and what was the story that I got from that data. So we found that, the Gutsy leaders that we interviewed in their own industry and in their own right, they all somehow tapped into both that formal data and informal data, connecting with people and pulsing the rooms and pulsing the group all the time to say, what do you need? And really getting to know the people who they are leading so that they know how to most effectively lead them.
Absolutely. Now, the subtitle where it says, I'm made for this moment. Mm-hmm. Now, and in terms of what we were talking about earlier, for me, when I see that, and I heard you say the good experiences and the bad experiences, you like the gutsy leader learns from both. And I always tell people all the time, for me, there's no such thing as a wasted experience. And when I share that, I'm usually talking about my various jobs that I've had, since I was 16 years old, ranging from a custodian to principal. And in between, I've been a jet engine mechanic. I've been a marketing manager for AT&T. I've been a secretary. But I consider none of those things wasted because every experience that I've had, both good and bad, helps me in decisions that I'm making in my current role. So when you say I'm made for this moment, that's the way I kind of take that. Is that did you hear that as you were interviewing folks?
Yeah, we did. It's interesting that you say you did so many different things because the folks in our book and us, the two of us as well, we've done a lot of different kinds of things. And, all of the experiences, we were able to transfer skill sets.
Yes.
Skill sets to build upon. So we, like you, we all the time say that there are no mistakes. When we're doing something, it's that we've been assigned to do it for a particular season, to learn something and to deposit something. And then we take that and move on to another experience, and we use those skill sets and build new ones. Absolutely.
Now, it's interesting. Yeah, go ahead, because I was going to say Dr. Biggs just said something that spurred another question, but go ahead.
I was just going to add, when in the situation with the Black Hawk Down episode, one of the takeaways for us was the difference between being trained to fight and trained to make a difference.
Right.
And, the gutsy DNA individuals, they're trained to make a difference. Someone who's trained to fight, you've got the technical abilities, you've been trained to do your particular task. But someone who's trained to make a difference, their DNA basically says, I've got to do whatever I have to do so that the outcome is favorable. So they're not the one asking, what's next? Can I have a job description? Can you, identify this for me? They're the ones stepping out, stepping forward, and moving as they're collecting data and implementing their strategy. So they're literally trained to make a difference. One of the things that I found unique of gutsy individuals is they go through a mental exercise where when things are normal, they start, you were talking earlier on the show about, you liking to work on simulation programs. But individuals with gutsy DNA, we go through a simulation where we will look and say, okay, what would I do if this situation now changes?
Right.
I'm in a normal environment. I start playing what-if game. A lot of times, the takeaway from those ends up being experiences that you can deposit in your bank account.
Correct.
That you end up using later. Now, folk look at you and say, man, it looked like you already had this figured out. Well, in a way, I have.
Right.
I simulated this out.
No, you're absolutely right. If anybody has ever followed or read anything about Tony Robbins, he's big onto that whole thing of visualizing and doing whatever it is, whether it's the golf swing or whether it's the shooting of the gun or whatever it is, of doing it first in your mind. And he's big in it. And exactly to your point, a lot of times you will get into what if then, or if they do this, I need to do that. If it goes left, I need to do this. If it goes right, I need to do this. If it does this, I need to do that. You're absolutely right. And again, that's a part of this, why it looks so easy. Because to the onlooker, they didn't see all that process taking place.
Well, as an individual that loves sports, I was listening to you earlier, you know the concept of muscle memory.
Correct.
And a lot of times, folks don't attribute that to the fact that your brain is a muscle.
Right.
So when you go through these simulation, these exercises, you're literally imprinting whatever that exercise was in your mind.
Absolutely right.
So as you're leading in different challenging situations confront you, you're able to extract that information and use it to your advantage.
And, you know, Mark, we believe from the book and also from our own personal experiences that that's the distinction between true leaders and people who are managers.
Right.
And, you know, the manager, that's the soldier who's just going to, you know, follow orders, follow directions, do what he or she is told to do, but not spend that time exercising that muscle memory. Leaders will spend the time exercising the muscle memory, and it's exhausting, but it's something that's so necessary. It has to be done in order to lead people through challenging experiences.
And Mark, remember when we did the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership in that mastermind, we covered the law of navigation, which basically, you know, states anyone can steer the ship.
Right.
It takes the leader to chart the course. Right?
Correct.
There's a big difference.
That's right.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, like I said, this is how, when I was sharing with you earlier of how the show develops and progresses as we go through, this is exactly how it does. You all say things that bring up more questions for me. And there was something that Dr. Biggs said earlier that I was getting ready to ask in terms of, we have all these varied experiences. And I was talking about this earlier as well as, but I would think that gutsy leaders may or may not like change, but at the same time, they don't have a problem embracing change or making a change if one is needed. So say, for example, if something now you've done the best you can and now it's just not working and you need to do something different, a gutsy leader doesn't really have a problem with now shifting to whatever that new thing is, opposed to just holding on for the sake of holding on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it, you hit it right on the head. Gutsy leaders embrace change even though, you know, we may not necessarily want things to change at a particular time, but we do embrace it because we know change is the only thing that's constant. And, you know, so we've got to be ready for it at any given moment. You know, we talk in our life about, you know, be ye ever ready. And
right.
That's what gutsy leaders have to be able to do. And don't mind it because we know that it's a necessity if we're going to constantly be improving the people that we're leading, the organizations that we're leading, and improving ourselves as leaders.
Which leads to the next one would be a gutsy leader. And again, I'm just, because I haven't had the pleasure of reading the entire book yet. I'm aware of it because I know we had conversations in terms of, but I'm just thinking in terms of, I'm quite sure, because usually somewhere along with gutsy comes the word risk.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just part of the formula. You know, I think gutsy leaders embrace change the same way they embrace risk. It's, as I made the analogy earlier, these are the individuals that if the house is burning down, they're right in the house. There is a risk. You can get hurt.
Sometimes you do.
Well, I'm laughing because I just I just had this conversation yesterday with one of my parents at the school, and he's a firefighter. And his daughter goes to our school, and then we were talking yesterday at dismissal. And his exact words to me was exactly what you just said. He says, you know, people tell me all the time how, you know, great and wonderful they think I am because I'm running into a house that everybody else is running out of. He said, but I tell you the truth. People ask me, how do I do it? I ask you all as educators and teachers, how do you all do that? And he was saying how I get it. I'm running into a burning house. I'm trying to, but he said, you all have to deal with so much. He says, so I guess the upshot of the conversation was, he says, I guess everybody has their own patience. I guess everybody has their own thing or whatever it is that they can deal with, because I know exactly what you're saying. He's like, wow, I don't know how you run into a burning house. And he's telling me, I don't know how you be a principal.
Yeah. You know what's amazing is whatever moment you have been uniquely prepared for,
right?
That moment, others look at you and say, I don't know how you do that.
Right. That's right.
That's exactly
But anytime I deal with like either the firefighters or law enforcement, and they tell me that, I look at them like with three heads. Like, are you kidding me? You actually equate or compare, or actually you think this surpasses. I mean, I've had officers stand in my office and say, man, I don't know how you do it. And I've shot back at them. I don't know how you do it. Cause if I had a gun, I might be using it. But it is interesting how you say, I am made for this moment. And for those that are in leadership, the other part I always tell people, and that's why I think too, sometimes for the folks that you interview, they probably were kind of looking at you like, why is everybody so surprised? But I think a lot of people really don't know what it's like to be in the leadership seat. I think a lot of people do really think it's easy. I think a lot of people think the leadership seat, anybody can do it. Not realizing everything that comes along with the one having to lead, the burden that's on the shoulder, the accountability, the responsibility. And for those who do make it look easy, some people honestly think that, well, that's a born leader. And I think I asked you that question a couple of minutes ago. And I think we talked about that during the mind group. Is there such a thing as a born leader, or do folks kind of, as we said, through experiences, become the leader?
There are some individuals that are born with certain natural instincts, natural abilities.
Yes.
But even those individuals will submit to you that experience has become their best teacher to
right.
tune those natural abilities. Studying, having dialogue and exposure to individuals that are ahead of you on the curve. Just committing to constantly learning. Now, if you come out of the womb with certain natural instinct and you just assume that's it, I've got it made.
Right.
You're going to get a swift lesson very fast. That's not going to take you very far.
That's
You're
true.
dealing with a dynamic battlefield that's constantly changing.
Right.
I was the executive director of a Chamber of Commerce, and one of the things that I spent a lot of time working with small business owners, they were looking at the change that the Internet has brought to the landscape as a fad.
Right.
Something they didn't have to commit to. This, if I keep my head in the sand long enough, sooner or later I'll pick my head up and this will have blown over.
Right.
And I had to sit them down and say, look, this is a change in the marketplace. The battlefield has changed.
Right.
And you now have to adapt. If you continue to ignore this, it will put you out of business.
Right.
Not hypothetically.
No, real. Literally.
That's right, literally.
Literally, that's right. It's interesting you will say that, because my wife is working on her MBA and she has case studies, and sometimes I'll do some of the case studies with her. And one of the ones we were doing was exactly what you just described, where it was saying that some of these companies, even if they're smooth sailing, they need to create the disruption. Because there's some things coming down the pike that if they want to be ahead of it, that they need to create it as opposed to react to it.
Right. If you look at I'll give you an example. Blockbusters dominated their industry when we had to rent movies and take them back, and that crazy, routine that we got involved in. They should have been the one to create the disruption.
Right.
Okay, what's next?
Right.
And they didn't. And when's the last time you seen a blockbuster?
That's absolutely right. Matter of fact, I think they're for the most part out of business for all intents and purposes.
Yes,
Right.
they are.
Yeah, because I know all the ones around me, they're no longer there. They're the buildings or something else. Matter of fact, the closest one to me now is a Sherwin Paints. So
Wow.
you're right. They're not even there.
That's right. Because the thing about gutsy leadership is that, you have to be a tradition shifter.
Right. And see,
you got to be able to disrupt the apple cart, as Coach Biggs oftentimes says.
and that's what I was saying in terms of going back to what I was saying in terms of risk taking. I mean, somebody gonna think, you're out there on the ledge when you say, you know what, I see this coming. This is what we need to do. And you have a whole room full of people saying you're crazy.
Yes. And being disappointed in you, and gutsy leaders have to be able to continue to lead through the disappointment.
Right.
Understand that we are going to disappoint people sometimes.
Right. And that's a very good point in terms of if you go into leadership thinking you're going to always be loved or liked, you're fooling yourself. If you think you're going to please everybody who is following you, you're fooling yourself, because it's just not going to happen. And you really do have to have a thicker skin to be able to take that.
You do. And that's where the coaching of the leadership coaches, so to speak, comes in, because we have to be able to then go into our quiet time, our reflective time, and talk to our coaches and mentors and say, I'm disappointed that people are disappointed in me right now, but I don't have to continue to lead. But you've got to be able to, back it up a little bit and be able to talk to somebody who can advise you to move forward with strength and fortitude.
And that's so important. And I'm going to shift gears in a minute as we move into the silo effect. But for what Dr. Biggs was just saying, and she served in the role as my coach at the school. And one of the things I appreciate, and I would tell her this, was she gave me the opportunity to vent. And I didn't always have to talk nice and calm and quiet. I could actually either be yelling or frowning or mad or angry or whatever. And she'd just sit there quietly, listen. And then she'd say, well, did you ever think about trying this? Well, how about that? Well, you know what? Maybe if you tried this. But that's what, in terms of, as a leader, that's not to say, whenever you take on a leadership role, I think, again, people sometimes think you're always supposed to be quiet and serene and happy and peppy and perky and this and that. Or the other part would be a dictator, or you're nasty, or you're this and that. Not always the case. But at the same time, you're not perfect, and you get frustrated and have feelings just like anybody else. And to be able to have somebody that you can vent those to, because sometimes it's just a matter of, you know what, I just thank you for letting me vent. Just the fact that I got it out was enough.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Gutsy leaders know that you can't bleed in front of your team.
That's
Right.
You have to have someone where that environment is safe for you to do that, because your team is always looking up to you as you have all the answers. Now,
right.
You're looking at them and saying, I'm working on all this.
That's absolutely right. But that is absolutely right. That is it. So now, as I said, we're going to shift gears to the silo effect, or any other book, for that matter, Dr. Biggs, that you'd like to share, talk about. But the one, like I said, I have in my hand is The Silo Effect: Invisible Barriers That Can Destroy Organizational Teams. Now, I was saying earlier about the book I'm reading now from the Lieutenant Colonel about, never flying solo. And this is kind of along sort of like that same lines where and I'm assuming, and maybe I don't want to make this assumption, that everybody understands what a silo is. That's where, you have at one point they were like, for lack of a better comparison, almost like a barn, except for they're taller, they're shaped, and you put things in them and they stand alone. Okay, that's kind of like a silo. It's like they look like a cylinder. As a matter of fact, I'm describing your cover, by the way. They look like a cylinder, and they stand. They could be right next to each other, but they don't touch each other, and whatever is inside of them don't impact what's inside of the others. They're silos. They kind of stand alone. The exact opposite of what the Colonel is talking about, like never fly solo. So talk to me a little bit about where did the silo effect come from?
Yeah, so from years and years of observation and research, working with different teams in different organizations and seeing some common trends that were not necessarily positive. So seeing, lack of communication between different team members and organizations, and then a level of toxicity that would result from that. Seeing a lack of collaboration between people in different organizations and groups where folks decided that they just didn't want to work with somebody else just because. And then, the work didn't get done. It wasn't purposeful. And also seeing where there was not a constant meeting of the minds, people coming together and sharing, well, I see things this way, well, I see it this way. Now let's talk about how we can come to consensus. And then also, one of my biggest pet peeves was seeing a lack of consistency in different organizations. And so one day things would be done one way, and then the next day they'd be done a different way, and then the next week they'd be done a different way. And people on the team were going crazy, not knowing what do I do now, because we've had so many different directives coming. So, putting all of that together over years after seeing it in different places and talking to other leaders from different places and hearing from them the same kinds of things, I said, I need to get this captured in a book that's simple and easy to read, kind of conversational kind of book, and have people read it and say, oh my goodness, this is describing the team that I'm in, or this is describing the team that my colleague in another place is in, and here are some tips and strategies about how we can pull things together, pull the team together. This book is really, the Silo Effect is really all about building the team and keeping the team together and knowing what you have to confront and dismantle so that you don't allow those invisible silos, those invisible barriers to destroy the team and ultimately destroy opportunities for organizational success.
I'm reading from the book now on page 17, Getting to the Root. Organizational silos can make teams sick and have them become unproductive, devalued, and malcontented. When silos exist, individuals, teams, and entire organizations suffer because the right hand usually doesn't know or want to know what the left hand is doing. Even when the right hand does know what's going on with the left hand, the level of mistrust is so high in a silo-present organizational culture that any real systematic progress is stymied and practically impossible to achieve. Silos that are either encouraged or permitted to exist within organizations will only be dismantled when someone has the guts, determination, and strategy to ask the tough questions that get to the root of differences in personality, philosophy, perspective, and purpose. Now, it's interesting because I know in a school setting, and I always reference the school setting because that's what I'm in most of the time. In the school setting, we can have multiple silo effects. I mean, you have each teacher that closes his or her classroom door, and they can go in and pretty much virtually do his or her own thing. You have, in our district, we have 52, 53, 55 schools. Each principal could close their door and in their school do pretty much their own thing. Even within the administrative ranks, like I said, now I have 2 vice principals, but last year I had 3. The 4 of us or the 3 of us could go into our offices and become silos. And what Dr. Biggs' book is against is helping us understand why, while many may think the silo effect is the way to go, it's not.
It's not. It really isn't, because, it's so important as a team for everyone to know what every other component of a team is doing. And that's why, Mark, if you remember during many of my coaching visits with you, I would talk about calibration conversations.
Right.
We've got to come together at different points, and they've got to be strategically scheduled and set up, but we've got to come together at different points so that we can all say, okay, I've been working on X, you've been working on Y, you've been working on Z. Now let's make the connection between those 3 points. And then how do we purposefully move forward to continue the work so that we all understand it and we're operating from a similar perspective. We're not ever going to have 100% the same perspective about things, but we can have a similar perspective that supports the work versus sabotages the work.
No, it's absolutely right, because I can tell you from experience, and still experiencing to some degree every now and again, you really can have a bunch of folks running willy-nilly, running off doing their own thing, thinking that they're doing something for the good of the body when really it's working counterproductive to the body. And as Dr. Biggs just said, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to be thinking the same, but you do want to be one team on one mission. Now, I'm looking for that quote in the book that I just told you about, because that's kind of like he's looking at it from a military perspective, which really works in the business world as well. And he and his troop had like a little mantra that they said, and I'm trying to pull it up for one team, one mission. That was it. I was right. I was correct. One team, one mission. And when you're operating in a silo, it's very hard to get to that. It's very hard to get to one team, one mission, because really, literally, it may be one team, but if you have 40 team members, you could have 40 different missions.
40 different missions, 40 different visions, 40 different purposes, and that's where the barriers destroy the teams, because you have so many different things operating at the same time, and nobody's coming together until they have what I call in the book a SAM. That's that person who is delivered to the team to bring things together.
Right.
To help move dismantle those silos. And so that person has to be gutsy enough to be able to sit with different groups, hear from them what they believe. Number one, what do you believe is the purpose of the work? What's your perspective about this? And to also kind of, survey what the different personalities are, because I talk in the book, too, about how personality differences can create silos. So
correct.
Some people, if I don't like you, I'm not going to necessarily give you the information that you need in order to do your part of the work. That's crazy. And what it does is it creates these silos, and silos, if they're not dismantled, they just get bigger and taller.
Right.
And they continue to destroy the possible opportunities that an organization has to really succeed and move forward and transform.
And Mark, let me add, I think, the military analogy, I think it drives the point home even in this silo discussion. If you think of the battlefield, and instead of you thinking of yourself as a member of the team, you're thinking, okay, I'm in charge of communication. I don't really care what the other guys are doing.
Right.
And if every soldier on that battlefield has that mentality, I don't care what Marc Medley's doing over there. I don't even know what he does. I'm doing my part. You will be destroyed.
Absolutely.
Right.
So one mission, it has to be something that everybody subscribe to, but one team has to be the flip side of that coin, or else either you're going to get hurt or you're going to get a lot of other people hurt.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm looking through and I'm seeing on chapter 2 where Dr. Biggs, you title it, "Do You See What I See?" And that's getting back to, I guess, the talking to the various groups, talking to the people to say, okay, what is it that you're seeing versus what I'm seeing, and vice versa. And maybe that's where, maybe when you have that conversation and maybe you can sync some things up, or at least begin to close some of the perception gaps. Like, okay, I'm seeing it this way, you're seeing it that way. No wonder we're not coming together.
Right. That's right. And that's why those sit-down calibration conversations are so important, because the quote at the beginning of that chapter that you just mentioned, chapter 2, I have a quote from Pitbull. And Pitbull says, I look at this game from a different perspective, and the conversations have to be honest enough where people are able to sit down and say, I've been looking at this differently. So, and here's how I've been looking at it, and here's why. And then someone else saying, well, I've been looking at it this way, and here's why. And then you can come together. But it's that savvy leader who knows enough, has the wherewithal to bring the groups together so they can have that honest conversation. And that's not going to happen right away. That's
right.
The leader has to be savvy enough to know when it's time for that kind of conversation to take place.
Now, see, it's interesting because there are so many variables that can feed into why you would get a silo effect. And I'm just sitting here thinking as we're talking, there's communication styles. There's, like, folks tend to, while we may have a little bit of all of them, but folks generally tend to lean on one heavier than the other. For example, some people are auditory, some people are visual, some people are kinesthetic, so forth and so on. So depending on how you're communicating with that person, an example I use is, I remember when I was working at AT&T, my boss, that's whenever I really got into this whole notion of understanding people's communication style. My boss at the time, my supervisor, she was very auditory. For me, I'm visual and I love writing. So for me, communicating through email was great. For her, communicating through voicemail was great. So we were always wondering why we were miscommunicating, because I was always leaving her emails, which she rarely read, and she was always leaving voicemails, which I didn't particularly care to listen to. But once I figured that out, I said, oh, I know why me and Virginia keep missing each other. I started now leaving her voicemails, and she did begin to start leaving me emails, and our communications clearly improved. That's just one variable. And then you have variables of, like, different core beliefs, where you're pulling together people who may have a different set of core beliefs that are still looking or have to work under the same team. And generally, the leader would hope that whatever his or her core beliefs are would kind of filter down to the rest of the team. It doesn't always work that way. And so even that can create silos. Well, my core belief is doing it this way. My core belief is doing it that way. My communication style is this way. His communication style is that way. How does that feed into the communication and creating of silos?
Well, interesting that you mentioned communication, because that's one of the main silos that I talk about in the book. There are actually four main ones, and they're four C's. So it's communication, collaboration, calibration, and consistency.
Correct.
And underneath those four main ones, there are four sub-silos, and it's in personality, perspective, philosophy, and purpose. So everything you just talked about kind of ties into that. And I do honestly believe that of the four C's, that the communication silos are the ones that can possibly have the most debilitating effect on the opportunities that a team has for success. Because if we are not able to understand, as you and your supervisor were, that our styles of communication are different, but that doesn't mean that we can't communicate with each other. We've got to learn how to do that song and dance with each other based on what your needs are. So if you need to hear from me, I will let you hear from me. I'll struggle through it, but I'll let you hear from me. And if I need to read from you, then I would expect you to do the same thing for me. And that's where, once the communication comes together, then we can sit down and collaborate with each other and, talk about what it is that we're trying to move forward to do and be consistent about it. Because once we get through those communication issues, a lot of times the personality issues kind of fall by the wayside because we realize, it's just that you communicate differently than I do. It's not that you don't like me and you're not giving me information that I need. It's that we have a difference in style.
Right.
And that the philosophy, we might believe something different. And we need to be able to talk about that. First, we've got to identify what we each believe.
Right.
And then we have to be able to come to some kind of consensus about what's best for the organization and what's best for the team. If our beliefs are very different, we need to streamline that and bring it to a point where it can still support the work of the organization.
Now, again, going back to the softball analogy that I used about yesterday, where we changed lineup and changed positions. I mean, really, what some of us could have done was got on our high horse with ego, because where I'm going with this is how ego can also play into silo also. I could have got on my high horse and said, how dare you drop me to 8th in the lineup whenever I was at 3rd or 6th or 5th? How dare you drop me to 8th? Or how dare you ask me to play catcher? I mean, ego could have kicked in there and we probably wouldn't have had the success that we had. But because everybody was willing to do what they needed to do to get the job done, we wound up becoming the champs. How does ego kick into the silo effect as well?
It does kick in, and I believe there's nothing wrong with having an ego. You just need someone who is, as I describe in the book, a Sam, and as your coach was on your baseball team, to pull those egos together.
Right.
So that the egos are not destroying the team, but the egos are actually giving strength to the team. So we want team members who believe in themselves and have a confidence that they can do this. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the ego. It's when the ego is left unharnessed,
right,
and left to its own devices without somebody who knows how to kind of bring them all together and then move forward, that we have problems.
And see, Terence, going back to your book, and again, I would think that being able to synthesize egos and work with personalities would have to fall in that DNA as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing when you bring these two books together, we're really talking about the same thing.
Right. Different angles.
She literally drilled down to a great piece on the silo side. I love the book because I think one of the things with silos is that they're silent.
Right.
They become the silent killers of organizations. And, these are not bad people.
Right.
You just don't see the vision and the mission the same. The analogy is, if you put a elephant in a room, Mark, if you're in the front, you're going to describe the trunk. If I'm in the back, I'm going to describe the tail.
Correct.
It's not that we are trying to run in different directions. We just had different angles. If we were to have a conversation on Mark, relative to where you were standing, what did you see or
Right.
feel or experience, that I could do the same, because you don't have an experience from the back of that elephant.
Right.
So I can complete your understanding the same way you complete my understanding. Instead of viewing that as being diametrically opposed, let's look at it as being complementary, and that's what the silo effect really exposes. You know, we are each other's strength.
Right.
Enemy.
And see, interestingly enough, both of your subtitles speak just as loudly as your titles. Because in the silo effect, the subtitle is Invisible Barriers That Can Destroy Organizational Teams. And as Terence just said, with the silo being silent, there are a lot of these things that we're talking about, and that's brought out in this book. That's why we want you to get the book, as well as the DNA of Gutsy Leaders. We want you to get both books. There are a lot of things in there that people you just don't even see them. You just don't even realize that's what it is, because we've taken some things for granted, some things we just don't know about. Like, say, for example, the communication thing, where I just gave the example of she was auditory, I was visual. I mean, some people are not even thinking along those lines. It could be something as simple as that. So whenever you start seeing invisible barriers, this is why coaching and reading is so important, because it brings things to mind or to light that you might not have thought of. They're common sense things. I teach a public speaking course, and the first course I tell the students is, everything I'm going to tell you throughout this semester are common sense things. There's nothing I'm going to tell you that you don't already know, but I'm bringing it to your attention so that your antenna will be up. Well, these books are doing the same thing. It's not necessarily something that we don't know, but they're hidden. We don't think about them. And unless somebody brings them to our attention, that's when, once it's brought to our attention, that's when we can begin to make the improvements. And that's why a book like The Silo Effect is so important, because you may go through these and not realize the 4 C's that Dr. Biggs was just talking about: consistency, communications, calibration. You may not realize that until you read a book like this.
Absolutely, Mark. And because we're like Coach Biggs said, they're not bad people. And,
right.
You know, they're hardworking people, and they're very committed to the level of work that they're doing, and they don't necessarily understand the level of work that another team member or another department or division is doing, and they just need somebody to bring that all together so that they can have some calibration, so they can purposely move forward together, doing the same thing, same vision, same mission, different teams, different styles.
All right. Well, we are down to 8 o'clock. I honestly, truthfully hope those in the listening audience, one, I hope you've been listening since 6, but if you haven't, I definitely hope you've been listening since 7, because my guests have been Coach Terence H. Biggs and Dr. Sharon M. Biggs. Both of them are authors. Terence and Sharon have co-authored The DNA of Gutsy Leaders, I'm Made for This Moment. Dr. Biggs has authored The Silo Effect, among other books. The 2 books go together: The DNA of Gutsy Leaders, The Silo Effect. You can read them independently, but as you just heard us say, they really do dovetail each other. And I highly recommend them. For those of you who are listening on the show, both books, you can pull them up in Amazon. The DNA of Gutsy Leaders and The Silo Effect. And as I said, I know both Coach Biggs and Dr. Biggs personally and professionally, and we've been trying to pull this interview together for a little while, and I'm so glad we got it together and we were able to have it this morning. I thank you so much for rising early to join me and to talk with my listening audience. The show is recorded. I will be sending you an MP3 link, as well as it will be on my YouTube channel, so folks who chose not to rise early with us still have the opportunity to hear it at their convenience.
Mark, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you both, and we will be in touch. Like I said, I'll be emailing you all the show information, everything, and feel free to share it any way you want. Once you get the links, they are yours to share however you'd like.
We will do that. Thanks, Mark. This was quite stimulating for us, even at this early hour.
I take a lot of flack on the early hour, but it's fun. This is in radio. This is drive time. This is when folks are in their cars. So, but I'm glad it was stimulating. It was as for me as well. Always a pleasure to talk to the both of you, and we will definitely be in touch.
Okay, take good care.
You too. All right. All right. Well, that ends another edition of, or another episode of, The Reading Circle with your host, Marc Medley. I love those two. I really do. Both Terence as well as Sharon, Coach Biggs, Dr. Biggs. Like I said, I've worked professionally and personally with both of them. Dr. Biggs for a year was my coach as a principal. She was my principal coach. And as I said, there would be times when I'd pull Dr. Biggs into my office or either call her on the telephone or text her some things I was really frustrated about just to vent. And she'd just sit there and let me vent. And then she'd say, okay, well, I'll tell you what, after listening to all that, why don't you try it? And the other thing I liked about her that I always told her was, even though she would make the suggestions, she wouldn't mandate them. She wouldn't force me to do what she said do. It was up to me. And some things, or most things that she shared with me, I would do. And there were some things I said, nope, that's not going to work for me. And she had no problem with that. She did not push back and say, I can't believe you're not taking my suggestion. I can't believe you're not. Nope. She didn't do that. If it was something that I thought, I said, you know what, Dr. Biggs, I see where that could work here. And then there were other times I said, nope, Dr. Biggs, that's not going to work here. And oddly enough, a lot of the things that even that I said no to, ultimately over time, I did start doing. I did start implementing, or I did start putting into place. Some of the things that we talked about wasn't right for that particular moment, but over time, I did start doing other things. But this is back again to what we were talking about in terms of reflecting and using all your experiences negatively and positively. All right, you know what? I remember having a conversation with Dr. Biggs, and we talked about this. Maybe I will try that now. See, that's what's been going on. So again, the book is The DNA of Gutsy Leaders by Mr. Terence H. Biggs, author, and Dr. Sharon M. Biggs, author. And the other book is The Silo, S-I-L-O Effect, E-F-F-E-C-T, Invisible Barriers That Can Destroy Organizational Teams.